Testing 1 2 1 3. Hey, what's up, everyone? Wanted to just make a couple of videos to talk about the reproductive system and just make sure everybody has a firm grasp on what they've been studying. And if you have any questions about anything that I'm talking about on these videos, please contact me. Big shout outs to all of you out there who have been contacting me about different questions that you've been having. I wish we could have more dialogue like this one-sided dialogue that I'm having in this video screen, because I know it's a lot easier when we're chatting. When we're talking on email, it seems like it's just real short blurbs, but we do what we can, right? So this first video, I really want to focus on the male reproductive side. I want to just run through some significant points that I feel that you really need to understand, especially going into this test. And also, so what I'm going to do with this first video is this is going to be about the male reproductive system. And then the second video will be about the female reproductive system. And then by next week, actually possibly by the end of this weekend, I should have a video that's doing more of a review for the lecture test. As a matter of fact, I have a feeling that I'll probably have a review for the lecture test up sooner than that. And I also want to send out some reviews for the lab final and some reviews for the lecture final as well, so we can wrap all that up. So let's talk about the male reproductive system for a minute. Essentially, the male reproductive system kind of is like weird, because everything starts with gamete production. And I really honestly think that if you're going to study this stuff, it should start with gamete production and then work your way out, because the rest of the system is designed to transport or nurture or mature gametes. So you might as well start with gamete production first. And gamete production takes place in the not sustentacular cells. I'm sorry. Those are the cells that take care of the sperm cells. Gametogenesis for the male takes place in the seminiferous tubes. The seminiferous tubes are in the testes. And so the seminiferous tubules or the seminiferous tubes, just imagine this giant coiled ball of water hose, and the walls of the hose actually have stem cells, spermatogonium, and these sperm stem cells they undergo mitosis, and then they undergo meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, and they produce ultimately structurally sound sperm cells, which they don't mature in the seminiferous tubules functionally. They just mature structurally. So physically, they look like sperm cells. Now, those cells wouldn't be able to get anybody pregnant yet. They got to go through another process. But at least physically, physical concerns, yeah, they look and they look the part, and they have the structures that are required for a sperm cell. The sustentacular cells that I was trying to talk about just a second ago, those are nursing cells, and they take care of the sperm cells. They provide nourishment, and they help to propagate maturation, physical maturation of the sperm cells. So the sperm cells travel out of the seminiferous tubules through the reedy testes and ultimately wind up in the epididymis. And the epididymis is a little structure that has a head, body, and tail portion to it. And the epididymis, what it does is it stores sperm cells and it matures them functionally. So before the epididymis, they're mature structurally, but once they get done at the epididymis, now they are mature functionally. They can actually get someone pregnant. And then when they're released from the epididymis, they go into the ductus deferens, also known as the vas deferens, which is the same cord that is cut during a vasectomy, and it travels up the vas deferens and into the pelvic cavity of the male. And once it gets into the pelvic cavity of the male, it kind of loops over the urinary bladder, goes behind the urinary bladder, and then merges at a spot called the ampulla, with the seminal vesicles, and the seminal vesicles, they add the first secretions to sperm cells to create semen. Because remember, you have sperm, which is just sperm cells, and then you have semen, which is the sperm cells plus the secretions of the reproductive glands. And so the seminal vesicles, they produce secretions that are high in prostaglandins, fructose, things like that. That's added to the sperm cells. They mix in the ampulla, and then it exits through the ejaculatory duct, which is coming in from behind the prostate, and enters into the prostate and merges with the prostatic urethra. Now, where did the prostatic urethra come from? Well, this was this weird structure, which is, the urethra that exits the bladder. But the urethra, when it exits the bladder in a male, it immediately passes through the middle of the prostate glands. The prostate glands actually wrapped around the urethra like a ring, and that's why when men have trouble with their prostate, the prostate shrinks and it squeezes on the urethra, making it difficult for them to urinate, causing pain and burning sensations. So the prostate is the second gland along the reproductive tract, and it adds its secretions, which are like an antimicrobial secretion, to the semen. So then it passes through the prostatic urethra. Then it passes through a wall of skeletal muscle, which happens to exist in the pubic angle of the pelvis. Remember back in 210, you learned that the pubic angle was like this in the front of the pelvis. And because men don't have a birth canal, there's no birth canal that's in the pubic angle. So instead, we have skeletal muscle, a wall of muscle that's there, and so the urethra passes through that wall of muscle, and when it passes through that section of the urethra is known as the membranous urethra. Immediately after that, it comes into contact with the last of the three types of reproductive glands, and those are the bulbourethral glands. And the bulbourethral glands add secretions for lubrication, and then it passes into the penile shaft, and that urethra that passes through the penile shaft is then called the spongy urethra because of the spongy tissue that surrounds it. And that spongy tissue that surrounds it fills with blood during an erection to keep the urethra from collapsing. Because if the urethra collapsed, then the sperm wouldn't be able to exit. And then it exits through the urethral orifice, which is at the hole at the very end of the penile shaft, at the glans penis. So that's how things are traveling. Now, of course, things are a little more complex when it starts talking about gametogenesis. Sorry about that, dry throat. So here's the deal. What happens is gametogenesis or spermatogenesis that happens in men, it doesn't happen until we hit puberty. So that's a huge difference between men and women. Whereas women, you guys do gametogenesis from month 4 as a fetus until like month 6 as a fetus. I mean, from month 4 to month 6, women are making all of the oocytes and all of the gametes that y'all are going to ever have. Men, we don't do that. We wait until we hit puberty to finally start making gametes, and then men wind up creating 500 million sperm cells a day. Through spermatogenesis in men, you see mitosis, meiosis 1, and then meiosis 2. The biggest difference between meiosis and mitosis is this. Mitosis is when you do cell division, but you are making clones. That's really what it is. If I sat here on screen right now and underwent mitosis, it would be the most disgusting thing you ever saw, because if I underwent mitosis, I would create 2 more eyes, another nose, another mouth, another head, 2 or more arms. I would literally morph and double up into this grotesque monster, and then boop, just turn into two Mr. Nixons. Both of them just as tall as the other, just as corny as the other, just as nerdy as the other. Yeah, it'd be two equal Mr. Nixons, and there would be nothing different about us. We wouldn't be like these sci-fi movies where one of us starts to develop, a personality all on his own. No, this is not my twin. This is a clone. So we are exactly alike, and no one's gonna, develop a second personality or identity. No, you're a clone. So you are what your father cell used to be. So as a clone, there's no diversity in that. It's the same. But in meiosis, you're not making clones. You're dividing and creating more cells, but there's what we call genetic diversity that takes place. Because if you look at the images in the textbook of a cell undergoing meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, they wind up going through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase 1, and then prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase 2. And in that process, you'll see them swapping pieces of chromosome. You'll see them swapping pieces of genetic material. It's like taking, when you buy a deck of cards for the first time, how all the spades are in one spot, the diamonds are all together, the hearts are all together, the clubs are all together. But if you shuffle them up and then deal them out, people get this hodgepodge of the four different symbols on those cards. Same thing happens in meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. You are creating genetic diversity by swapping up the genetic material and spacing them around until you have four diverse cells at the end of meiosis 2 who do not contain all of the same genetic material. They contain much of the same genetic material, but not all of it, which is why you can come out having similarities to your parents, but you don't necessarily look like your parent. And the reason why I'm looking over here like this is because I have a picture of me and my dad on the wall here in my office, and I'm looking at the picture of he and I, and we're two totally different heights. Like I'm 6'5.5", which is why a couple of you have seen me in person and you kind of looked at me like, is that really you? Because I'm always sitting down in these videos. So I'm about 6'6". My dad's about 6 foot even, maybe 6'1". You can look at us and you can see the similarities. If I could get this picture off the wall, I would. But you can see some similarities, but we definitely do not look exactly like one another. I have several strong features of individuals on my mother's side of the family. Those Barbados roots are strong on my mom's side of the family. As a matter of fact, because my dad is chocolate in his facial complexion, my mom is extremely light. She's very light skinned. So combine that Barbados light skin with the Hershey's chocolate of my dad, and you get my complexion. If there was no genetic diversity, I would have popped out looking exactly like my dad, verbatim. I would have just been another Mr. Nixon that looked exactly like him. So genetic diversity is very important so that we get things that are different, things that are different all the time. So those sperm cells, they undergo mitosis, then they undergo meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, and then we wind up with haploid cells at the end, because we started off with diploid because they had both. They had 46 chromosomes, but now we're haploid. We got half, so it's 23 chromosomes. And the reason why we want it down to 23 is because we need to combine his 23 with her 23 and then make 46, which makes a person. Another thing that's important to remember with spermatogenesis is that you have spermatogenesis and then you have spermiogenesis. And spermatogenesis is when you're just, you're making the cell, you're undergoing the process. Spermiogenesis is what we do to have a fully structurally sound sperm cell. the textbook does a real good job of showing an image of how the cell changes over time. At first, it looks like someone spit something out on the street. That's what the cell looks like. But then over time, it starts to develop the tail, the midpiece, the neck, and the head, and the acrosomal cap. And that just takes time. Another thing about the male reproductive system is the production of testosterone. And you will notice that at first glance, the process looks kind of difficult to follow. But what you have to remember is that it's actually kind of simple because you have to remember to look at targets. Now, I will say this. There's one thing about that image in the textbook I do not like when it talks about testosterone, and that is they're afraid of leaving out stuff. So instead of making 2 or 3 pictures, they put it all in the same picture, which for some of you who have personalities similar to mine, that kind of irks your nerve because you're trying to follow what's going on. And it's like, okay, is that happening at the same time as that? And it's not. You kind of have to think of it as we release testosterone in pulses. And so testosterone's being released, testosterone's being released, testosterone's being released, and the concentration of it begins to rise in our body. Well, when it rises to a certain point, it causes a negative feedback loop to occur. And then that's when inhibin starts showing up and saying, okay, we've reached a high enough concentration of testosterone. Let's release the inhibin. And that's going to have a negative effect and tell us to back down on testosterone release and production until it drops down to a certain point and then it's released again, which is part of the reason why men have ebbs and flows in testosterone production and why there's 2 different ebbs and flows in a day. Whereas women have an average of 28 days for an ovarian cycle dealing with all of their hormones. We're like almost on a 12-hour cycle. You know, we peak like in the morning and then drop around noontime and then peak back again like at 6 or something and then drop again. It's kind of crazy, you know. So it's a 12-hour cycle. Testosterone is a major hormone for men. If you haven't watched TV and seen commercials or gone online and seen commercials or read health sites and see the information or even read about it in the text, testosterone is very important. Testosterone literally acts like not just a hormone for us, but it also acts like a major neurotransmitter for us. It has a strong impact on our brain development during adolescence. It has a major impact on not just sex drive and libido, but it also has a strong effect on emotions, strong emotions, attachments, cognitive thought. I mean, testosterone has a strong effect on identity and on how we deal with masculinity. So testosterone is a very powerful chemical. As a matter of fact, that's why for hormone treatment, for some women, they give them testosterone because it's such a dominant chemical and you get almost immediate results from using testosterone. Sorry. I'm trying to remember if there was something else that I really wanted to get into. I know I wanted to talk about the gametes, and I know I wanted to talk about the hormones. Speaking of hormones, don't forget FSH and LH have a direct relationship with all of this. So let's back up. Let's start from the very beginning. So a kid, he turns 12, then he turns 12 and a half, and then he winds up undergoing puberty. And the way that he undergoes puberty is the onset of puberty happens because the hypothalamus releases a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. And gonadotropin releasing hormone is released from the hypothalamus. It targets the anterior pituitary, and then the anterior pituitary releases 2 gonadotropins, which are FSH and LH. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. FSH stimulates follicular growth in females, but it stimulates sperm production in males. So FSH, really important. LH, on the other hand, has nothing to do with trying to target sperm cells. Instead, LH, luteinizing hormone, it targets the interstitial cells in the testes. And the interstitial cells are the ones who are responsible for producing testosterone. So LH has a direct effect on those cells, which has a direct effect on testosterone production. So I knew there was a couple of very important hormones I was leaving out. So I think that's it for now. If I think of anything else, I'll throw it in the next video, or I'll make a post about it. Remember, if you got any questions about any of this, just let me know, and I'll have this video posted in a little while, and I'll also have the video for the female reproductive system posted pretty soon.